Assalamualaikum and welcome back. Okay, just now we just cover about t-test and also the PET t-test. Okay, now we are going to continue our lecture on one-way ANOVA. Okay, do you remember one-way ANOVA? Which part? Is it a parametric or non-parametric? Do you remember? Alright, good. Okay, for one-way ANOVA, okay, the use of one-way ANOVA is to compare of two or more independent groups in order to determine whether there are significantly different. Okay, let's say almost the same like a t-test but for many groups. Okay, here you have a group A at the shopping mall, you have group B at the airport, you have group C at the hospital. But all tests you want to look at the mean of the stress score. Okay, for the one-way ANOVA, okay, the H-null hypothesis is all, let's say K, let's mean we don't know how many groups, okay. All K populations means are equal, okay. While the alternative hypothesis, okay, at least one group or one population different, or at least one of the K population means is not equal to others. Okay, the requirement for one-way ANOVA, okay, it must be dependent variable which data is continuous, independent variable which data is categorical or nominal, and it must have values of on both the dependence and independent variable. Okay. The independent samples or group, random samples of data from the population, normal distribution, okay, approximately of dependent variable of for each group, homogeneity of variance, okay, means that variance appropriately equal across the group and no outliers. Okay, for the test statistic for one-way ANOVA, okay, we use symbol F here. You see, F. Okay, can we reject the null hypothesis? Okay, the calculated F value is then compared to the critical F value from the F distribution table with degree of freedom, okay, and the chosen alpha. If the calculated F value is greater than critical F value, then we reject the null hypothesis. Okay, let's say your F value, okay, is higher than critical value, you have to reject the null hypothesis. Okay, if you do manually calculation, okay, are you going to reject or not the F value? Let's say if your calculated F value is more than critical F value, you have to reject the null hypothesis. Okay, when you reject the null hypothesis, I mean you reject the null hypothesis is the same. When you reject, that means the mean is not the same. Okay, there are differences between the mean. Okay, if the F value, okay, lower than critical F value, okay, do not reject the null hypothesis. Okay, in the software, especially SPSS, okay, let's say you have a chosen p-value and calculated p-value. Okay, how you are going to decide if your calculated p-value is lower than chosen p-value or alpha, you have to reject the null hypothesis. When you reject the null hypothesis, that means you're telling that the mean is not the same. This means there are differences between the mean. Okay. If the calculated p-value is more than chosen p-value, that means you do not reject the null hypothesis. That means you do not reject that the mean is the same. Okay, if you see SPSS output, the F value here, and this is the significant value. Okay, next we move to the Wilcoxon rank test. It is used to compare. Wilcoxon rank test is used to compare the differences between two dependents or paired group when the data is either ordinal or continuous but not normally distributed. It is considered the non-parametric alternative to the paired t-test. Okay, the hypothesis also the same. Okay, while the test statistic for Wilcoxon, W equal to mean, W plus and W minus, where the W plus and W minus were the sum of positive and negative rank of the differences. Okay, if the W plus or W minus, okay, choose from the minimum value, is lower than critical value in the Wilcoxon table, you can reject the null hypothesis. Okay, this is the SPSS output for the Wilcoxon. Okay, next we move to Mann-Whitney U Test. Mann-Whitney U Test is used to compare differences between two independent groups when the data is either ordinal or continuous, but not normally distributed. It is considered the non-parametric alternative to the independent t-test. Alright, the hypothesis also the same. And how to make the decision? If the U1 or U2 is lower than critical value in the U table, you can reject the null hypothesis. Okay, this is the example for the Mann-Whitney SPSS output. Okay, next is the Kruskall-Wallis test. Kruskall-Wallis test is used to compare differences between three or more independence groups when the data is either ordinal or continuous, but not normally distributed. It is considered the non-parametric alternative to the one-way ANOVA. Alright, the decision, if the K value higher than critical value, as in the H table, we can reject the null hypothesis. Okay, this is the example for the Kruskall-Wallis test SPSS output. Okay, this is very important. How you're going to make a decision whether you want to reject the null hypothesis or not. Okay, please look at your chosen p-value and what is the p-value that you get. From here, you can make the decision. Let's say the p-value is lower than chosen p-value. You have to reject the null hypothesis, meaning that you reject the hypothesis that they have the same mean. Alright? Well, if you have obtained p-value is higher than chosen p-value, do not reject the null hypothesis. This means you cannot reject that they are having the same value of means. Alright, thank you for this lecture. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.